Hello there, my scrumptious little buns. As you can see, I am wearing this jacket because it is freezing here in Portugal. But anyways, in the year of 2004, a movie called Napoleon Dynamite was brought to cinema. It featured a geek teenager by the same name going through life, befriending an immigrant, dealing with his quirky family, and trying to pursue a romance with a fellow classmate. The movie was well received and in some sense has become sort of a part of pop culture nowadays for many people. But I've never watched it. I also didn't watch Napoleon. I saw this shot of Joaquin shooting the pyramids in Egypt and Josephine being younger than Napoleon, and I kind of gave up on wanting to watch it. But Napoleon Bonaparte is an interesting figure. His antics throughout Europe served as a catalyst for hundreds of events all over Europe. Seriously, for several countries of Europe, and I'd say North Africa, you can find that Napoleon had a hand in their creation or deeply affecting them. And for the purpose of this video, Brazilian independence. I'm kidding. Sorta. I'll explain. On the 19th of December 1807, Napoleon invaded Portugal. He sent General Junot at the head of an army, and the king, hearing of this invasion, took his court and, with the Royal Navy, sailed away to Brazil. This event marks the first time a European empire had its capital in the New World. The court's presence in Brazil, particularly in Rio de Janeiro, fundamentally shifted the status of Brazil. Hell, it was actually brought up from the status of a colony to that of a kingdom, making Portugal officially the United Kingdom of Portugal, Algarve, and Brazil. Portugal declared war on France and occupied French Guiana. Ports in Brazil were opened to friendly nations, meaning for the first time ever, Brazilians could sell their goods to other countries. Journals began being published around the country, and a bank was even opened for the first time in Brazil. Schools, military academies, other academies dedicated to the arts. Brazil began to look much more like a country rather than some dirt poor colony in ass fuck nowhere. Eventually, however, the king was called back home, almost 20 years after he fled, and Napoleon had long left the Iberian Peninsula. His son, however, stayed behind. When the new liberal parliament tried to call him back, Pedro refused, declaring Brazil an independent nation. And while Portugal, we just went on our merry way. And let's talk about the Civil War in Portugal now. Yeah, that's about all that school has taught me. I didn't even know that there was an independence war. Literally, all that I was taught is the Ipiranga shout, and then we fast forward to the Portuguese Civil War. And that's kind of what I want to do with this video. I want to tell you, basically, a summarized version of the history of Brazilian separatism and the Brazilian War of Independence. Our story begins with the Minas Conjuration, a separatist movement formed in 1789. These conspirators and ne'er-do-wells wanted to start a rebellion and build their own country inspired by the United States, as they were upset at the rapidly decreasing mining of gold in the Minas Gerais captaincy. This uprising was also the culmination of a series of efforts by the Portuguese monarchy to reap even more money off of the previously lucrative Minas Gerais gold mines. Now, again, this video is about the Brazilian War of Independence, not really these failed rebellions. So why am I telling you this? Well, basically, it's to give you the context that people were getting increasingly fed up by the Portuguese monarchy's efforts to get even more money off of them. There were at least 4 failed rebellions in Brazil, all of them with different goals, and all of them around the turn of the 19th century. And Brazil declared its independence just 20 years after the Minas Conjuration. People in Brazil were almost definitely fed up with the Portuguese monarchy. Its constant attempts to wrangle even more money out of Brazil while keeping the thousands of miles of country economically isolated from the rest of the world. However, with the arrival of the Portuguese royal family, their isolation, their exploitation was done. They were treated not as a servant to the capital, but as the capital. The king himself got insanely comfortable in Brazil, and as I said earlier in the video, he had a bunch of cool new shit built in the country. But thanks to the filthy liberals and their icky revolution in Porto, the king had to go back home. Honestly, they can't let a man be. He left his son behind to rule the now Kingdom of Brazil in his name. It is rumored that as he sailed back home, the king told his son, "Pedro, if I lose Brazil, it's best I lose it to you, who will respect me, than to any of those adventurers." The king returned home, accompanied by about 3,000 courtiers who had taken as much as they could from Brazil, including money that they took from the Brazilian bank. Society in Brazil had become almost completely divorced from the Portuguese society. And the Portuguese court, basically our old version of the parliament, began taking steps to restore Brazil to the status of a colony, stripping them of their newly found freedoms and sort of equal rank to Portugal. Yet, there was one big problem in their way. Pedro, the king's son, who was directly in charge of the Kingdom of Brazil, if the courts say wanted to remove the provincial system and restore the captaincies that existed beforehand, well, Pedro had to approve of such a change. And of course, he wouldn't. So then the courts tried instead to recall Pedro to Portugal. And I mean, they were the rulers of Portugal. The Portuguese Empire had become a constitutional monarchy, so they held the power. So Pedro had to listen to them, right? He said no. What do you mean no? No. 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 Pedro said no. And what happened exactly for him to say no? Well, he received a petition of up to 8,000 aristocrats and merchants, all asking him to stay. He apparently said in response, "As it's for the good and happiness of everyone in the nation, I am ready. Tell the people I am staying." This event is now known as the Dia do Fico, the Day of Stay, with the province of Pernambuco already having split off from the Kingdom of Portugal and technically starting the Brazilian War of Independence. The Dia do Fico served as a severe escalation to this war. He made his own government after his previous Portuguese ministers resigned, and amongst his new ministers was the renowned José Bonifácio de Andrada Silva. The man has been named the patron of Brazilian independence, and his efforts were vital for Brazilian independence. And by the 7th of September 1822, Pedro was named as the first emperor of Brazil. So here we finally have the War of Independence. In truth, Portugal lacked the resources for a long protracted war against Brazil, but several thousands of soldiers were stationed all over Brazil, particularly in major strategic port cities. There was combat in modern-day Uruguay. A local commander by the name of Álvaro da Costa remained loyal to Portugal, and he occupied the province's capital of Montevideo. He was defeated, however, by Brazilian forces in a 2-year-long siege of the capital in 1824. This siege would end combat against Portugal in the region, but Uruguayan locals would keep fighting the Brazilian government as they sought their own independence. The war in the province of Bahia had a different shape. The population there had sort of split between supporters of Portugal and supporters of independence. These groups were repeatedly harassing each other throughout the war. Like in Uruguay, Portugal had control over the capital of the province and some small amounts of territory basically around the province. To defeat Portugal, more effort would be required in here. Militias formed which tried to take back the provincial capital of the province. They were supplemented by volunteers in direct aid from imperial forces in the form of naval vessels, while the Portuguese themselves had received an extra 2,500 soldiers, which came from parts of Brazil where the fighting was much worse for them. These efforts, however, didn't really pan out for Portugal. Salvador, the provincial capital of Bahia, capitulated, and the Portuguese vessels who had tried repeatedly to break the siege were chased all the way across the fucking ocean. Alright, those madmen must have really wanted their gold back. But anyways, elsewhere, in what used to be the province of Piauí, Portuguese support was higher, and they did see some victories against Brazil. Eventually, however, more localities started flipping sides and choosing the independent side over the true cause of the motherland. In the remaining coastal provinces, we can see similar stories. The country had split between the Portuguese and Brazilian populations. Some of the provinces were more Portuguese aligned than others. Piauí and Pará come to mind. But by and large, the court's decision to recolonize Brazil proved to be the straw that broke the camel's back. No Brazilian in their right mind would want to be a colonist again. And so, by 1824, the war was effectively lost for Portugal. Whatever forces, if any, we had left in Brazil, had no supplies, and they were hopelessly outnumbered. What remained of the Portuguese navy, as I said, was literally chased back to the Tejo River. But technically, the war was still on. Portugal refused to concede defeat. They didn't recognize Brazil's independence, and they also went to great lengths to make sure that no one else did. It's at this point of the story that the British show up. I mean, were you expecting something else? It's the 19th century, come on. Portugal called upon the principles established in the Congress of Vienna and way too much diplomacy to make sure that no one recognized Brazil. But the Brits, well, they like money, so they in turn pressured Portugal to recognize Brazil. First, in a letters patent, where the King of Portugal formally ceded sovereignty to his son, Dom Pedro, and later, finally, in the Treaty of Friendship and Alliance of 1825, Brazil, however, had to pay £2 million in damage, and also promised that they wouldn't accept any potentially rebelling colonies into their empire. But I mean, how would they do that? It's like, Brazil's the only American colony we had, so how was a country with negligible navy take a colony that at the very least was on the other side of the ocean? I mean, anywho, This really regally made Portugal and Brazil friends, and most importantly, recognized Brazil as an independent nation. And with the treaty signed, and now 6,000 people rotting in graves, the rest of Europe could enjoy those fancy dandy Brazilian ports. However, there was an interesting thing that happened. Briefly, Brazil and Portugal were reunited. And depending on how you look at things, they were reunited with Brazil as the senior of the two nations. That's right. When the emperor's daddy died, his heir apparent was still the Brazilian emperor. So the crown of Portugal passed to Brazil. This could not be. Emperor Pedro abdicated the Portuguese crown, giving it to his daughter Maria, who would be crowned as Queen Maria II, as she became the Queen of Portugal. She was excluded from the Brazilian line of succession, and with that, Brazil's independence would be secured forever. The first emperor of Brazil has an incredible story, one that in retrospect this video should have focused more on. He fought in Brazil against Portugal. He fought in Portugal against the absolutists during our civil war. But, however, he would die in Portugal, in the Carouge Palace, leaving behind a politically unstable Portugal and a increasingly unstable Brazil. And he also obviously left behind deeply traumatized children who saw their father just up and vanish on them. His son and heir, also called Pedro, saw his father for the last time when he was 5 years old. However, he took the Brazilian Empire to its golden age, and also its downfall. Pedro I of Brazil is a man who is highly regarded in both Brazilian culture and our own Portuguese culture. Today, he lies buried in the Ipiranga Monument in Brazil. His heart, literally, remains in the city of Porto, the city he spent about a year defending in a harrowing siege. When so many historical figures nowadays are coming under increased scrutiny due to either extreme genocide, racism, or slavery, I see in Pedro I someone worthy of praise. Someone who founded the Brazilian nation and also defended the liberal ideas in Portugal. Ugh. I see a figure that reminds me of the shared culture and heritage between Brazilians and Portuguese. To the Brazilians watching this, no, I'm not giving you your gold back, so you can stop mailing the letters. I feed each one of them to my golden cat. Yes, I did bathe him in your gold. You are welcome. And since he started eating your letters, he's become very fat. But although he's oddly still since I bathed him in gold. But honestly, I am fascinated by your history, and frankly, this video deserves more information, which I am not able to give. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed, and that you stick around to find out why exactly you're all so scrumptious.